Welcome, everybody. My name is Thomas King. I'm the CTO of DE-CIX. Most of you most probably know me. I want to talk about BFD at IXPs. And let me directly jump on what BFD does. So BFD is bidirectional forwarding detection, and it's defined in RFC 5580 and 5581, and there are a couple other RFCs about that, but the technology I want to discuss with you here are about these two RFCs. And you know, if you look into a very short description of what BFD is, and I think I took that from a Cisco documentation, it's a low overhead, short duration method for detecting failures in the forwarding path between two routers. And low overhead means here it uses UDP packets, which are sent back and forth between two routers, and it does that in a very short very short time frame. So you can actually do that in microseconds. At least that is what the RFC talk about. And I have here an example with two routers and a cross connect to connect them. And what actually happens is if router B wants to set up BFD to detect if there is a failure on the forwarding path, it just sends BFD packets again. There are just UDP packets back and forth and does it very quickly. And now if there is a failure on the forwarding path, then the BFD will detect that because the packets don't get back, right? So there's just the router B is just sending out the packet, but it doesn't get any response from router A. And so it detects it there that the forwarding path doesn't work anymore. And if that happens that's configurable, let's say 3 times in a row, then for instance, the BGP session can be taken down. And you could now argue, of course, BGP has their own mechanism to detect if there is a forwarding path issue, which are the hold timers. But usually the hold timers are configured in an area of minutes instead of microseconds or milliseconds or whatever you want to configure with BFD. And this is exactly the reason why it's worth looking into BFD, because it allows to detect forwarding failures very, very quickly. And to be honest, the motivation why I looked into this technology again was that we at DE-CIX had an issue in summer this year where there was a forwarding detection issue, a forwarding issue at the DE-CIX Frankfurt on our platform, and it took us a while to fix that. But we realized that customers were still sending traffic, and they don't have mechanisms to detect that there is an issue and route away traffic. Essentially what we need is that customers, sorry for that, that customers can, have a mechanism to route around issues that might happen and make sure that their network is stable and issues that an IXP are not propagating into their networks. And so let's look a little bit more into the details of how BFD would work at an IXP. So let's assume the two routers are not connected directly anymore. They are now connected to switches from routers. And actually what happens, BFD doesn't care much, right? It's just UDP packet being sent back and forth between the two routers, and it just traverses the IX and sees if the forwarding path still works. And so that's a pretty neat technology from my point of view, because for the use case of figuring out if the forwarding path works for two peers at an IXP, that can be used very easily, and it can be used in both ways. And if there is an issue with the forwarding path at the IXP, then the BGP session between the two peers, if they have a bilateral peering without a router configured, can be automatically taken down. And we have all been there, right? That there is a forwarding issue at IXPs. At least if you're part of this community for some time, for a couple of years, you have most probably experienced that, especially if you run distributed IXs. And so what could IXPs do to make sure that customers don't run into the issue that if there is a forwarding issue at the IXP, that it propagates into their network? And IXPs, they could facilitate the use of BFD by, for instance, highlighting the value of BFD and providing configuration guidelines so that it's very easy for the peers to configure BFD. However, the peers really need to do the heavy lifting because they need to configure BFDs themselves for all the bilateral BGP sessions, which they might use at an IXP. And as I was just talking about bilateral BGP sessions between two peers, how about if the route server comes into play? And of course, that's also something we should look at, right? Because sometimes a router from a peer has a connection with the route server. It's not only sometimes, it's very common. And if there is a forwarding issue at the IXP, then the route server should be aware very quickly so that it can update all the other peers about that issue. And actually, BFD does a great job here because it supports also that use case. It just, this router just sent BFD packets to the route server and can now check if the forwarding path still works. If you look into the into what could be the outcome of this. So if there is an issue on the forwarding path between the route server and the peer, and again, it also works in both ways, then the BGP session between the peer and the route server can be terminated. The route server, by this means, can detect that there is an issue with the peer, can select alternative routes for the prefixes announced by the peer, and send out an update to all the other peers about that very quickly. And if there is not an alternative route for this prefixes from the peer, it can just withdraw the prefixes from this peer, and so traffic does not get dropped on the floor for minutes, because that would that is what would happen with the BGP hold timers until they expire. So it can react very, very quickly in the range of milliseconds. And so traffic gets routed away from the IXP, which has an issue, into transit or whatever other solution the peer might have implemented. And IXPs, to make that happen, really need to provide or enable BFD at their route servers, and also, of course, motivate peers to use it by showing the value and help them with documentation and configuration guidelines. And again, the peers need to configure that. But it's required that the route server support BFD, otherwise the peers can't use it. And now you could argue, wait a second, BFD is not a new technology, right? It's years old, and actually I looked it up on our really nice UIX website, because you can look, if you log into the UIX website, you can look up all the different presentations which have been held about the topic of BFD during the last years. And you see the Mix guys, they have given a presentation on the 9th UIX forum. It's quite a couple of years old, this presentation. I think it's from 2006. And Moscow IX, they gave also a presentation about BFD being available at their IXP on the 25th UIX forum. And the good thing is, if you click on those links, you can also look up the presentations, because they are linked there. So you see the slides. And I think also videos, if they are available. Pretty neat feature from the UIX website. And actually, I spent quite some time looking into what the Moscow IX guys did, because they, to my understanding, are the only one already providing BFD at the route servers today. And you probably remember on the tech mailing list of the UIX association, I started a conversation about what is your experience about having BFD available at the route servers, and there was also a conversation about what the experience is from the Moscow IX guys. And let me summarize it here very briefly. So Moscow IX today has 695 peers connected. When I looked up that number, it's a couple of weeks old, so probably a little bit more today. So they have a very large number of peers connected to their IX. And we don't know how many of them have forwarding detection configured on their bilateral peering sessions. We don't know that. But what we can see is how many of them have BFD activated to the route server, because Moscow IX provides BFD at the route server, and they have a very great looking glass service which actually shows you the status of this BFD session. And we see that out of the 695 peers, 102 peers use BFD at the route server. So that's roughly about 15%, which is quite impressive from my point of view, because it's a unique feature from Moscow IX. It shows that there is demand for that. They also provide great documentation, how to use the feature, and how their route server is handling BFD. So it's very, very helpful for customers, I guess. If you are aware of any other IXP providing BFD at the route server, please let me know, because I'm really interested in understanding more about this in the IXP industries, because I think we should do more here. I did a Twitter poll because I wanted to know how many of the interconnection industry people actually use BFD to protect peering sessions. And it's actually here, peering session is a very broad term, right? It could be a private peering session, or it could be via an IXP, a bilateral peering session, or using the route server, though it doesn't specify that. But what we see is a very interesting result, though. 30% already, 32% already use BFD, and they are aware of what it is and how to use it, what the value is. But about 60%, they really don't use it. Some of them think about it, that they should do it, but about 30%, they don't even see a value in that. And I think there's room for improvement, how we can bring forward our industry by helping everybody understand what the value of BFD is, and also providing a solution here. And I actually was thinking about that it's probably worth that we look into this area as a community, as an industry, as the EUR-IX, and come up with some standardization. Because if now DE-CIX starts providing BFD at the route server, and we do it differently to what Moscow IX is already doing, and then a few other guys might come up with BFD at the route servers, then it would be weird to our peers who are connected to more than one of these IXPs, right? So I think it's worth standardizing that so that BFD at the route server behaves equally at all the different IXPs, because that will make it a lot easier for our customers to use this great feature. And so what could we do? I think we could make the peers aware, more aware. I think the documentation from Moscow IX is already a great start in this direction, that the value of BFD at IXPs, and also cover the two use cases I just presented here. We could also provide documentation and configuration guidelines, so it's very easy for the peers to set it up, especially if it's standardized, right? And as I just said, I think we should standardize the configuration values for BFD at the route server, and also probably make sure that the different looking classes, especially Alice looking class, because it's highly used, also shows the BFD state of peers in the looking class. And then finally, it's probably worth coming up also with configuration guidelines for BFD at the route server. So it's easy for us as the IXP community to enable it at the route servers. I'm pretty sure that BERT can support BFD. I'm not so sure about OpenBGPD, but I think that's something we can work on and figure out how that could work on OpenBGPD and other route servers. So I think, if we make it very easy for ourselves to digest BFD at the route server, that would help. So I was thinking of, would it make sense to set up something like a EUR-IX workshop for BFD at the route server, and work together, and let's do it together and make sure that we enhance our industry, and make sure that our customers and peers can get a more stable network by using this technology, and are not affected by forwarding issues at IXPs. So that's pretty much it, what I wanted to present here. And actually, I have a question for you, which is, should we set up this kind of workshop and have a discussion about BFD at IXPs and how it could look like? Because I think we should do and yeah, a common endeavor here to make that happen. So what do you think about that?
Good idea. I think, we'll take that to the FPC and the URIX and work on that idea and come back to you on that.
Thanks, Thomas. I think I agree. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we should definitely look into. There are some questions in the chat. Michael, do you want to take those?
Yeah. So what if two routers can reach the route server, but they cannot reach each other or directly?
So the final answer to that is most probably that we should encourage our peers to set up BFD with a route server and between themselves, because that protects both forwarding passes, right? And this is what you most probably need to do. And I'm aware that BFD might not be the answer to all the forwarding issues, especially if you have distributed IXs with different passes, like, if you run MPLS, VPLS, or VXLAN, EVPN setup, there are sometimes different passes, and forwarding issue might only be on one pass. So BFD might not traverse all of the different passes. I'm aware of that. I'm not saying that BFD will solve all of our forwarding issues which might come up, but at least it will make the world a better place by detecting some of the forwarding issues which we have today, which we don't have a solution for implemented right now. So it's a step in the right direction, and we can talk about how we can make it even better. But with the technologies available, I think that would be a first great step.
Okay. The next one is a fairly long question, so let me try to read it out to you. At your scale, did you experience problems with your members about BGP flapping because of BFD? In cases that there is no obvious connectivity issues between the member and the route server, how do you handle troubleshoot such reports?
So currently, we don't have BFD available at the DE-CIX route servers. We think about introducing it, but this is why I do the presentation here. We didn't want to come up with a different setup like the Moscow IX guys, and then I just read here in the chat that DE-CIX is also working on providing BFD. So I wanted to first propose that we standardize it somehow and agree on a common setup how it should look like for the happiness of our peers and customers. Instead of just DE-CIX is doing something and then everybody else is doing something differently. So I don't have any experience on that, and I first proposed that we standardize it. If you agree, let's do that, and then we will roll it out, and then I can answer your question.
Okay. Then there is another question. What are the proposed BFD timers from DE-CIX or Moscow IX?
So at least on my side, from DE-CIX, I can tell that we don't have a proposal for that yet. So we had a conversation on the URIX mailing list about that, right? What are the values, for instance, Moscow IX is using? And also on the DE-CIX mailing list, there was a discussion about what are the values other people are using on private peering sessions. So I don't have a proposal for that. I think that is something we should discuss in the workshop.
Yeah, I can see Flavia actually mentioned in the chat that Moscow IX is apparently using 1000 milliseconds.
Could be a good value. Yeah, let's have a conversation about that. I think it has different dimensions, so we need to see what is scalability and the capabilities of BERT, for instance, or for OpenBGP or the route servers. So how much load can they handle? And then also what is the operational experience, for instance, from Moscow IX, what works great, what is an issue, also how capable are the routers from different vendors. So I think it's worth looking into these numbers a bit.
Yep. Okay, that kind of concludes the question for you, Thomas. So thank you for your presentation.
So before I leave, should we go on with having a workshop, or so who would be in? Can we do we have a chat, right? So could everybody who wants to join for a workshop raise the hand or leave a comment in the chat, so that I think we should start with a virtual workshop, right? Because given the current corona numbers, it's most probably worth doing a virtual one. Yeah, please leave a comment in the chat. I think if we find 3 or 4 people, would that be good to start the workshop?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I agree. I think starting maybe with something virtual to get things started, and then potentially doing a physical one. Hopefully, if we get to meet at the forum in Tampere. So yeah, maybe we can plan something for early next year.
Okay, perfect. Great, let's do that. So Bijal, I will reach out to you to discuss how we set up this virtual workshop first, and then yeah, we invite everybody who is responding here, send out a notification to the tech mailing list also, that people can join later on. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, I see we've got a few people that are interested already in the chat, so I think something we can go ahead with. So yeah.
Perfect. So thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.